Okay, well, thank you all. This is a meeting of the CAPC, which is the Climate Action Plan Committee, I believe. And we are the zoning subcommittee that is chaired by Oscar Mertz and myself. And this is our third meeting. So I will give a kind of a big, we'll introduce ourselves, but just a big picture here of why Andrea and Jacob have so thoughtfully been able to join us to give us some feedback. And so we're the select board created this committee, and Stephen Frail is the chair of it, and he is an attendee here, listening in. And basically, what we're given the task to create opportunities for the town for climate action plan. And so the way we broke it up, we have different boards have different representation. I'm representing the planning board. I'm one of the planning board members. Artie Crocker is also a planning board member, but he is representing a different group. So we've broken up into different groups: buildings, zoning, environment. I'm trying to think of different. Anyway, there are different subcommittees. We're the zoning subcommittee, and we have a team that includes myself and Oscar. Oscar will introduce himself in a second. He's also an architect. And then Justin Savignano, who's here, is the engineer, town engineer, one of the town engineers. Dave Roach is the building inspector. Lee Newman, who's joining us momentarily, is the head of the planning division for Needham Planning. And so we have the task of coming together to here's Lee, to put forward some initiatives regarding zoning to the larger group on the 12th, on January 12th. So this is our third meeting. And so the reason why we asked Andrea and Jacob to join us is because they have so much experience with this and are leaders locally and nationally, and they're colleagues of mine. And I thought that it would be great if they could take a look at it and give us some feedback on what we did, and we'll share that. So Andrea, and Jacob, do you want to introduce yourselves? And
sure, I guess I can go first. My name is Andrea Love. I am a principal in an architecture firm based in Boston, where I focus on sustainability. And then I've also been involved as it relates to kind of committees such as this. I was on the City of Cambridge's Net Zero Task Force, both the initial one in 2014 and then the update that happened last year. And then I've also been involved in the City of Boston Zero Carbon Zoning Ordinance.
And the AIA, right? With the code, or?
Yeah, exactly. And I served on the National AIA. And then
the USGBC.
Yes.
And I'm
going
to be Andrea's
BSA
PR
president.
And she is the current BSA president. We sat on the board together for many
thing.
years. Yes, it is very. And Jacob.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you, everybody. I'm Jacob Knowles. I'm the director of sustainable design for BR+A Consulting Engineers. I also recently served on the board of the BSA, helped write Boston Zero Carbon Zoning, was partially involved in Somerville's zero emissions regulations, and also helped write the new net zero stretch code for the state.
And thank you, Jacob. And there are colleagues we work together on projects as well with BR+A. So and I see George Kent is also here. George, do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, you're on mute. Perfect.
The reason I'm joining you is I serve on one of the other subcommittees. And one of the things I wanted to know is what you folks are thinking about in terms of potential zoning issues related to future sustainability things that the town is interested in, and what you're proposing that people consider. One of the things that our group was proposing was that we suggest that the town develop a strategy for looking at all town buildings I represent the PBBC as well. I used to be chair of the committee for probably 15 years or so. And each project that we do, we have to look at potential for solar and other issues on an individual basis. And there's no overall town strategy for doing that. So we have to kind of fight with the finance committee and the select board and so forth to make sure that they allow us to consider looking at those. What I think we ought to do, and our subcommittee thinks we ought to do, is potentially develop a strategy that would say that for every town building project, we look at all of these issues as a part of the project scope to determine whether or not it makes sense to do that and in what form. So I'm here kind of as a visitor looking in on that, and we're going to be proposing something from our subcommittee to look at just that, because there is no town has no strategy with regard to it. Everything's considered on an individual basis. And we made the decision at the school on Central Avenue to put solar on that building, but that was our decision as a building committee, and we fought that through and got it done. We also ran into some difficulty along the way with things like the building on at the landfill. We considered putting solar on that building, that new building, but we were kind of headed off at the pass by saying you really can't do that without our permission, even though we had money in the budget to do it. So, but we think that every building that we look at in town should be looked at from a sustainability point of view, and maybe even a net zero point of view. But there ought to be a strategy, and right now there is no strategy in the town of Needham for doing that for public buildings. So that's the reason I'm here, is just to kind of
Great.
look in on what you guys are doing and share any thoughts that we might have.
And I have to say also, George and so I was part of the Permanent Public Building Committee for almost 10 years. And in my place is Lynn Denninger from Canon as architect representative. So George, I've worked with George for 10 years. So Justin, do you want to introduce yourself, and then Oscar and Lee?
Sure. I'm Justin Saviano. I'm the assistant town engineer for Needham. Previous to this, my career is in commercial. I'm a civil engineer, but my career has been in commercial construction. And I was I had my own company. I was a principal of a clean energy solutions company, Newport Renewables, mostly doing net zero home builds down in Rhode Island and commercial and industrial solar projects around the New England states.
Great, thank you, Justin. Oscar?
Yeah, hi, Oscar Mertz. I'm an architect, planner at Elkis Manfredi. I know Jacob. I know we've worked together. I'd like to meet Andrew. Nice to meet you, Andrew. George, I haven't met you, but I would look forward to talking to you. I've been on the housing plan working group, which has been about a 14-month effort, 15-month effort to get a plan in front of Needham. Natasha's been the co-chair on that board as well. So that together we kind of are bringing across cross-fertilizing some of the proposed zoning changes in Needham for housing with these these potential zoning issues related to sustainability. So I'm interested in trying to cross fertilize all of this effort on Needham zoning reform that's coming up. We have to address some significant zoning reform, and obviously addressing building codes, adopting some more aggressive codes in Needham, I think is part of this whole picture. So excited to hear what you professionals are going to help us recommend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just to add to that, not only do I sit on the housing with Oscar, but I'm also on the board of NUARI, the Needham United Against Racism, where we're trying to bring equity to all of our projects as well. Surprise, surprise. But and so Lee, are you available? Yeah.
I am. I'm sorry, I'm having some wireless problems here at the house, so I'm not going to turn my video on, but I am the director of planning and community development. I've been in Needham for like over 30 years now. And the planning board basically does all the major commercial permitting in town, including, of course, reviewing any projects that come out of the PSAB. And I think our department is especially interested in what modifications we should be making to our current zoning bylaws to encourage this net zero in development, and what barriers currently exist in our zoning that we should be looking at modifying. And also, what are some of the strategies that other towns that are using that you think are models we should be focusing on as we begin to develop our own strategies and implementation plan?
Great. And so with that, let me share to you where we are.
So just,
So,
I
go
know you
ahead.
probably said this in different ways, but just to make sure I understand, there's all these different committees, and each one is trying to bring forth solutions that relate to its purview around sustainability. And
Right.
Today's meeting
Yes.
is specifically focused on the zoning
Well, zoning and building, because
and building.
that's what George is the chair of that group.
Okay,
Or
thank you.
so we have there, I can't remember exactly how many groups we have. I'm sure that Stephen's probably like, I can't believe you can't remember that, but there are different groups that are looking at different parts of it so that we can kind of divide and conquer and come up with a plan and for implementation and just in general. And so ours is zoning, and it overlaps with building. And I think that there's an opportunity here and George, as sitting on the PPBC and working with our group in general. And, you know, we built the Hillside School, the Sunita Williams School, which was through MSCBA. We've done a lot of some new construction that is LEED and that has, you know, some requirements, but it's not coming from the town. And so how can we not only create zoning to help not only institutional and civic, but commercial and multifamily and single family, but also municipal buildings. It's a huge bonus to be able to, you know, the code it continues to change. And if we can be in the forefront of that, which we tend to be kind of timid about in Needham, and, you know, we usually compare ourselves to other towns, that would be great. So we've met twice already. This is the third time that we're meeting, and we came up with these, and let me blow this up a little bit, these zoning group recommendations. And we're also looking at like low-hanging fruit, because there's a town meeting in the spring and a town meeting in the fall. And I know Lee is really busy with other initiatives to help us put together these, but if there's something that that we can do easily, or that other towns have done that we can model it after, that could help us push it forward, if that's a possibility, that would be great. But the first one is modifying zoning for ground mounted and rooftop solar system installations for commercial, municipal, and multifamily buildings. This includes heat pumps and energy efficiency systems. And then review opportunities of sites in town, review ease of permitting online and creating different fee structures for this to happen. We'll need to create definitions, setbacks, and approvals, and the review process. How do we streamline a review process to encourage it to happen through the planning board, special permit by right, and then review the stormwater bylaw for recharging. And so, so this is for modifying the zoning for ground mounted and rooftop solar systems for larger buildings. Then the second one is modify zoning for rooftop solar installation for single family residential buildings. This includes heat pumps and energy efficiency systems. And then this is similar, except we're not looking for sites, because this is, and then it's also incentivizing net zero homes.
One question, Natasha. I know that Needham is a stretch code town.
Right.
And have you looked at proposing to adopt the specialized opt-in stretch code?
I don't think so.
I don't think we have, no.
I would
'Cause it's-
encourage you to do
one of-
so.
Yeah, one of the things that needs to be looked at is, okay, what's your current zoning? And first of all, I guess, are there any direct conflicts with the solar ready and solar requirements of the stretch code and the specialized opt-in stretch code? Because that's the first thing you'd want to make sure you don't have any legal conflicts there, because I assume the state code would supersede any zoning conflicts there.
Mhm.
And then you're right, how else do you facilitate it, make it easier rather than just be sort of passive, I think would be the second piece of that. But the other thing is, you know, opting into the specialized opt-in stretch code can help address some of these issues in terms of promoting solar and efficiency and other things. So that's kind of an
Okay.
overarching strategy.
So
So
basically,
review.
it's adopting into that and then kind of reviewing the zoning framework to see if there are any conflicts with it, with the actual implementation of that under those regulations. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure I know what the differences are, but we can look that up for sure.
Well, there's
What-
2 stretch codes now.
Well, I'm familiar with the stretch code, but not the optimized stretch code. What is the major difference?
So I don't know, Jacob, you were.
Can you
He
summarize?
wrote,
that?
Jacob wrote it. Jacob, why did you change?
I don't want to take too much credit. There was a lot of people involved.
There were, but
But-
you,
So the specialized opt-in for commercial buildings that are high ventilation buildings, the biggest difference is that you have to install the electrical capacity to fully electrify the building in the future.
Okay,
For other building types, like other commercial buildings, like an office building, it would likely require you to be all electric or to buy renewable energy to achieve net zero on an annual basis. The
yeah, it's aiming to get to buildings to net zero
and then
or net zero ready at least.
Is that what we were fighting for with the
that's it.
Yes.
That's what we were fighting for last year.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so now there's 3 code options available. There's kind of the non-stretch code.
Right.
There's the old stretch code, which is just a kind of increase in efficiency that you're automatically kind of part of as already being a stretch code community. And then there's the new opt-in stretch code, which is pushing towards net zero buildings.
How is it not optimized? It's option or
Yeah, it's opting in. Yeah.
opting? Okay. I want to make sure we know what we're saying, right?
so
Okay.
is it focused around larger office buildings? Are there thresholds at which it kicks in?
So the stretch code applies to buildings over 20,000 square feet for
Okay.
commercial, but it also applies to residential, which is, I think, almost any scale residential.
Okay. So the optimized version maintains that threshold.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
And it is the opt-in because you have to actually actively opt
Opt-in, not opt-in. That,
Yeah.
There you go.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Took 3 times.
So that's why
Okay.
the town would have to decide whether it's your select board or your town meeting, or I don't know what your legal
Town meeting.
structure is. Town meeting.
Town
So it'd have to
meeting,
be brought in as a warrant article, and town meeting would have to vote and approve to adopt this specialized opt-in stretch code.
Or for example, in our case, the Permanent Public Building Committee could make that decision as long as they could justify the additional cost. For example, we're now looking at building the new school administration building on Highland Avenue. If, for example, we went in and looked at the electrical systems and decided we would need to modify that slightly and it would be an incremental cost to the project, but we had the funds to do it, we can make that decision on our own. We don't need to go to town meeting to do that.
For municipal, yes.
Or municipal. I mean, we couldn't say we'd do it for the whole town, for every building in town. That would have to probably come through later, but we could do that as a part of the project. Just like we did solar for Sunita Williams or other projects. We made that decision ourselves. As long as we have the funds for it and can justify it. We have
But you need
option
the
to do
select
that.
board to approve it, right? Because the PPBC is part of is under the select board, right?
Not really. It'd be more, this is what one of the things that, and this may sound like heresy, but one of the things that we've done over the years as the building committee is we've made those decisions because we feel we're more capable of making those decisions than some of the other boards. And as a result, we've made the decisions and then let them slap us on the wrist and tell us
Not to
we
do it,
probably
yeah.
shouldn't have done that. But
Yeah.
if we stay within our budget and within our, all the budget requirements for the whole project and get it done, everybody's going to say, oh, wow, you did that? Wow, that's good.
Yeah,
You know what I
So
mean?
I think that
That's
is,
what-
it would be nice,
that-
yeah, it would be great to have you be the leader for the town and then go through with the regular town adoption through the town meeting.
Right,
that
but we could do it
take-
project by project for now. And I was thinking, since that project is just starting, we're just starting with a contractor and so forth. That might be something that we would look at as a potential, but we'd have to talk about that as a committee and see what we wanted to do. But,
Jacob,
but that sounds good. I'll have
strategy?
to, excuse me?
I'm just asking Jacob, is that a strategy that towns are doing? Their municipal buildings are jumping in as an opt-in for just the work that they're overseeing, and then the town itself goes through a process for additional commercial and residential buildings?
I'm not specifically aware of any towns that are saying all municipal buildings must follow the specialized opt-in stretch code as a policy for the town. But I'm sure
Except
there
for
are people
Boston, right?
Well, I was going to
Uh,
say in the city
no.
of Cambridge, they set a policy that all city buildings would be net zero probably 5 or 6 years ago, and they're now adopting the opt-in code. So it's maybe a little bit ahead because there wasn't an opt-in code and that was the only thing they could influence. But I think I would just say, I would encourage, because it can take a while to get some of these things adopted, I would encourage you to start that process as soon as possible, because it's obviously going to impact a far greater number of buildings, and certainly the buildings that you can control at the municipal level, going to net zero now makes a lot of sense, but I wouldn't, in the interest of, the urgency
Yeah.
of climate change, I wouldn't delay personally.
so-
Well, I want to say Stephen wrote that the specialized code is likely something that the CAPC, this, the larger group of the umbrella group of this, will consider for bringing to the town meeting in fall of 2023. So it's in the chat. He also clarified that we have 6 groups that I completely blanked on, which is this one, which is the climate, smart zoning and permitting, the net zero buildings, which George is part of, the transportation, natural resources and waste reduction, clean energy generation, and governance. So we're trying to kind of encompass all of these pieces by getting, everyone's specialty and then bringing it together on the
What's
12th.
the difference between the net zero buildings and, or the kind of scope for the net zero buildings and the zoning and permitting?
Well, this is the zoning group. And so the zoning, I can give you the 5 things that we've come to talk about how we change zoning for this. The net zero buildings, I believe, are more of the municipal buildings in general,
Okay.
but George can explain that more. Let me just tell you the other 3, and then I'll throw it over
Okay.
to Lee, who I think wanted to speak, and George. So the 2 is a modified, the solar for, larger buildings and residential. The other one is planning board to coordinate with MBTA communities and the CAPC work and amend rules and regulations for applications with information on resilience, environmental impacts, parking, transit and transportation, and equity. And then the 4th is create townwide master plan for climate strategies. So that creates strategies for commercial, municipal, and residential, review building codes and stretch code existing and new requirements, which is what you're talking about, review electric ready buildings, reporting for greenhouse gas inventory and emissions to set goals for 2050 reductions, green roofs for new construction, and then big house impacts. We have an issue in town that we have a lot of tear downs. And so that's kind of, all of these are kind of their own pockets, because there was a 2-year process to review the zoning for that. They did minor changes or minimal changes, and Lee was part of it, and so was the
Dave Roach.
so is Dave Roach, who's the building inspector. So there's a tree bylaw, stormwater, electrification of systems, and town resources. So we wanted to keep them in different buckets so that we could get some accomplished, including the first 2, which I think will be more low-hanging fruit. Whereas some of this work and this one, also the applications is something the planning board can do. And 2 of us are on, there are several of us that are on the planning board that are working on the MBTA communities and the CAPC. But these 2, this create the townwide master plan, is a longer range project, and so is the big house impacts. So Lee, I don't know, you and George, if you want to elaborate on that.
I don't have anything else to add to that.
One thing I would say that, oh, sorry, was someone going to say something?
No, that's all right.
One thing that it doesn't seem like you're currently addressing that I would strongly encourage you to consider is the embodied carbon side, particularly from a zoning, because it's often new construction. The vast
Mhm.
majority of emissions for the next 10 years are actually going to be in the embodied carbon of the construction. And there's kind of 2 approaches that most municipalities have been taking. One is a kind of whole building approach where it's, you do like a life cycle assessment, or you kind of target, maybe structure and envelope or kind of key systems. And then the other is more of a what's called, it's typically referred to as like a buy clean policy, where it targets specific materials and sets carbon limits, like around, say, concrete and, other kind of key materials.
Mhm. What's it called? This one, this is the whole building, and the other one is the,
It's typically called like the buy clean.
how do you, I'm gonna
Buy,
mess it up.
like, like we're gonna
Like
buy something,
buy?
BUY.
Buy
Yeah,
clean, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
because this one, the whole
and there's
building approach,
municipalities and states that have kind of taken both approaches.
the whole
so-
building approach, what I understand, oh, sorry, Lee, go ahead.
How is that regulated? I don't understand. How is that, how are these goals actually regulatorily implemented?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So for the city of Cambridge, the way they're doing it is through part of their review. So there's a review that's done for all their environmental goals early in the project. And so for the city of Cambridge is taking the whole building approach. And so, teams need to provide a narrative, and then ultimately working towards providing a full building LCA, life cycle assessment, on how they're reducing the embodied carbon of their project of new construction.
So that's done through like a site plan approval process?
Yep.
So that would be planning board versus
Yeah.
zoning?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that would be, that would be planning board for projects over a specific size.
I know that this Newton, I think it is, has looked more at the buy clean. I don't know how their review is. I wasn't involved in that. I've read it, but I'd be happy to put you in touch with people that have been involved in the kind of more material approach. And the
Mhm.
state right now, there's currently legislation that's been put forward for the buy clean, I guess, a statewide policy as well.
So on
Right.
individual
And City of
residential,
Boston is more going through option A as well. Sorry, go ahead.
so on the whole building approach in Cambridge, is that for single family homes? So anything that's being done, multifamily, single family, that's all going through the same process of having a strategy and then doing an LCA?
I think there's a size limit. And so let me pull it up.
Yeah, Boston Article 37 applies to buildings, I think, over 20,000 square feet, and that's
Yeah.
the threshold.
I think it's
then
the
you have
same
to
for
look at
Cambridge.
Embodied carbon.
And they've also, because it is a newer thing to be addressed, like the city of Cambridge has it kind of phased in. So the first few years is just like, do an assessment, tell us what you're doing, think about it, right? In the hopes that like
Mhm.
that would get people doing. And then I think it's in 2 years, they start with a 20% reduction target. And then like it, and so they ramp up targets over time, but it starts actually just requesting that teams understand their embodied carbon, period.
Mhm, mhm.
Got
And
it.
I think in the city of Boston, again, they also have a number of, and I'd be happy to share their policies with you. But the city of Boston also has a number
Do you-
of different strategies under their embodied carbon section, and they're more leaning on the lead credit of just making it a requirement to pursue the lead credit of the material
And
reduction,
let
which is
me-
like a 10 or 20% reduction. And again, that would
Right.
ramp in over time.
And one thing I do want to share, and I know Andrew, you're going to share also in a second, is we're working with BR Plus A and Thornton Tomasetti on a project for across from Wentworth. Jacob, you're not working on that because you're not on our team for that right now, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
500 Huntington.
Oh, yeah, I'm aware of that one.
You are? Okay, okay. So there's different certification systems, and this is, George, this is something, especially for PPBC, that we have, there's the Living Building Challenge Core, there's the LEED, and there's there's Fitwell, right? And so one of the things that and I just took a screenshot of our presentation yesterday because I thought it would be helpful for us to look at this. It talks about, the soft costs and the hard costs of these things, and how some of them are more focused on buildings that have a lot of user interaction. So right now we're doing a pavilion, so people come in, but they're not really working in the building. Whereas an office building where people would be working in the building would want to do well and fit well. Whereas buildings that, like the pavilion that we're doing, which is more for events and gallery space, probably wouldn't have a lot of users. And so we're doing LEED for that particular one. And then there's some projects that we're doing Living Building Challenge, but it kind of, the impact categories, it just gives kind of a big picture of what we're doing. And And so, yeah, I think it's worth looking into this as, you know, MSCBA for the schools require us to do LEED. But there are all these other things that, you know, could also, if we're not doing LEED, could be taken into consideration. And I think it's really worth talking about with PPBC, and I can come in, George, if you want me to. I'm sure Lynn knows a lot about it too.
Okay,
But it gives options, right? That you don't have to be LEED or LEED certifiable, that there are other ways of doing it that also, you know, have different, depending upon the building and the type of building that we have. If there's a lot of, you know, if it's an administration, the administration building would have different criteria than a school, than, you know, or than the whatever, any other building that we have.
Sure, if
So
we could-
anyway, it's just something to talk about in general
so
at another time. But
you can send me this along with your other notes. That would be
Yeah.
helpful.
sure.
We can talk about it later.
But we talked about the embodied carbon because we were talking about it for the building is, you know, you have to make decisions of what parts you're going to do to make these buildings as sustainable as possible. And you can't necessarily do all of them. And some of them you can't put solar on because there's not enough roof, but you can do renewable energy. So it's kind of having this balance of all of these things. But what you're talking about carbon, the whole process is, it's not only the materials for it, but the way that things are being built and then the way that things are being procured as well, versus just looking at the materials. And so that's something that, for example, you know, concrete is not good for carbon. Like we were just saying yesterday, okay, concrete, glass, aluminum, none of that is good for carbon. So then that's our whole pavilion. So what do we do? And so,
Yeah, and that's the kind of two approaches that I've seen being taken is either like you target those big materials, you know, aluminum,
Right,
glass,
right.
concrete, etc. Insulation is
Right.
usually one that falls into that group. Or you kind of say, okay, let's take a whole building approach, which requires a little bit more knowledge potentially on the team and building that, like, you know, the design team and building that capacity, but allows you to kind of
Right.
look at a little bit more holistically at things.
right. And what are the opportunities for using CLT? And there's a lot of
Mhm.
education that's going on right now about opportunities, especially in this time when there have been a lot of procurement issues as well. But what are the opportunities for this? And I think that would be great for PPBC and the town to determine how, you know, what direction do we want to take for which different types of projects? It might be that every project has a different criteria, and some of them are already, you know, MSCBA or someone who gives us funding already has requirements. And do we want to exceed them or meet what they have?
And one of the things I would encourage consideration for too is existing buildings, right? Like one
Right,
of the best ways to reduce embodied carbon is encourage building reuse. And from a kind of zoning and planning standpoint, you know, you have a lot of power in being able to do that. And so maybe there's a way to kind of bypass the embodied carbon requirements if you're reusing a structure, or, you know, like incentivize in some way that building reuse.
and so this is an issue that we're having, especially with residential. Most of the buildings in town are residential buildings. There's a big tear down issue that we have in town, and we understand that developers, that's how they make money. And oh, it looks like Stephen has his hand up. I don't know if we can. Oh, I'm the host. I can allow him to talk. I'm bringing him in, I think. Hold on. Sorry, Stephen, I know you didn't want to be a panelist, but I'm bringing you in. So. Stephen, I think you're in our meeting now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, sorry about that. I put that up earlier. I forgot to put it back down, but I was just trying to get your attention to some of the notes, but you read those notes in the,
Oh, well, now we brought you in. So now you didn't want him to come in, but we brought you in. No.
you brought me in. Y'all stay in just in case there's anything else that comes up.
Okay.
Thanks.
But
Sounds
I
like-
think, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what it really sounds like would be great for us to have or to produce would be an implementation chart of what are the various initiatives we need to look at, stretch code, opt-in stretch code for residential, for commercial, what are the limitations, what are the pros and the cons, what towns are adopting, maybe there's a little bit of history about what other towns are doing, so we can inform and educate. So when we're up for this for town meeting, everybody understands what these various options mean. As you say, there are lots of choices here, and there's subtleties to how you adopt, and even what you were saying, Andrea, about how you want to get ahead of this and you want to start with, let's just get you to understand we want an assessment, and then we're going to start layering in limits and ramping everything up. So I think there's an overview, a big picture discussion, executive summary, whatever, of what we need to do. And then there's the detail of the various steps for codes and zoning that need to change. And for which particular categories, for municipal, for commercial, for residential, and multifamily. Yeah, I mean, right, there's so many components here. It would be nice to streamline this, or at least get it into something as sort of clear sets of steps and implementation steps. You probably have stuff, you probably have summaries of something like that, Andrea or Jacob, that we might,
Yeah, NEEP has produced a summary of the stretch code and the specialized opt-in stretch code. And there's a coalition of different towns and advocates organizations that are collaborating to help towns promote the transition to the specialized opt-in to move into that category. And so then that would be, my number one priority recommendation is to consider that. And then, like Andrew was saying, there are certain blind spots that are not addressed by either of those. So one is embodied carbon. Another is fully net zero, like the procurement of renewable energy from offsite for what you can't generate on site, because even the specialized opt-in stretch code only addresses on-site renewables. And then there's the issues of making sure that your zoning is flexible to facilitate the decarbonization of existing buildings. So that's like applying solar panels on roofs that are within a setback, or adding insulation on the exterior of a building that's already non-compliant with zoning setbacks, things like that, so that people can enhance their existing properties. Those are some of the blind spots, I think, of the code. And so the tools that are used to address those are the permitting, like special permit, site permit review for things like the embodied carbon. For the buying of renewable energy to get to actual zero in operation, that's being done through things like BERDO and BUDO, so existing building emissions regulations in the city of Boston and Cambridge. And then the setbacks issue, that's just being done on an individual, zoning basis to say, okay, if you're adding insulation to the exterior of a building, you can have up to a foot of extra beyond what's existing or beyond the limit of your setback or whatever you need to adjust to allow that flexibility.
Yeah, in the city of Cambridge, its net zero zoning ordinance is broken into 4 areas that basically follow exactly what Jacob was saying. There's existing buildings, new construction, which is where the codes and embodied carbon live. There's the energy supply, which starts to look at the grid and, how do you clean the city grid? And then there was the last category was kind of financing capacity building, which is more of like how does the city pay for this? How do we build capacity within the community?
What's the third one? So encourage the reuse.
So
of buildings.
it was existing buildings, which got at some of the things like the BERDO requirements. How do we actually address, because most of the buildings that exist in 15, 20 years exist today. So if we really want to get to a decarbonized community, how do we do that? We have to address existing buildings. And there were things like in City of Cambridge, they had to change the zoning ordinance to allow, insulation was not part of setbacks and like minor things like that, but then bigger things like the BERDO requirement falls in that. So there's kind of existing buildings which have different strategies on how you attack them. New construction, which is sort of what we've been mostly talking about, which was the codes and embodied carbon. There was energy supply, which looked at how to get, and this, maybe outside of the zoning group, but, from a citywide standpoint, it was how do you get everybody access to renewable energy for the grid and clean the grid. And then there was financing and capacity building, which was more of, how's the city going to actually do it?
Okay, so the decarbonization, it happens in the encourage reuse of existing buildings, right?
It actually exists more explicitly under the new construction,
Okay.
because that was where like
of
major
new
projects kind of fall.
And existing, so new and existing buildings.
Yeah,
So
And the
I
energy
did it
supply-
a little differently here, but
that's okay.
energy supply was both on-site and off-site, and that's something
Yes.
you said was a blind spot. I think, Jacob, you said that the off-site was not something that was particularly clear or
Correct. The stretch code and the specialized opt-in stretch code do not address procurement of off-site renewable energy to get to zero.
okay,
They only address building efficiency, decarbonization, and on-site renewables because they felt like they couldn't regulate procurement, like an operational issue, through a building code.
Right.
And so they were leaving that to tools like Berto and Budo for existing building operations emissions limits.
Okay,
And
so I put
Oscar,
up
to your
here-
question, oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just put up your create implementation chart, which is what Oscar mentioned, of initiatives and limitations, pros and cons, what towns are adopting, and then we were gonna look at, look at the stretch.
Just
um,
a quick note on that, Natasha.
Yeah,
Needham has already opted into the stretch code.
right,
so
the
we don't
opt-in
have to do-
stretch code.
We've already opted in to the stretch code and we'll get all of the 2023 changes then automatically without having to take another vote.
Okay,
The
But there's a
question
new
before-
one. Yeah.
It's
the
a new one
question
that's called the
before us
opt-in.
now is whether or not we go for the specialized code. And the
right, that's
specialized
the
code-
opt-in one, right,
Right. Well, they're both opt-in, but we've already opted into the stretch code.
yes,
So we
right.
would have to affirmatively opt into the specialized code now, which would take us to the, well, basically what the state has said is needed for us to reach net zero. The stretch
Right, and I-
code will get us there.
And I think, Steve, these are semantics. I think the stretch code is known as the stretch code, and then even if you opt in or not, and then there's the opt-in stretch code is the specialized one, is what they were saying, I think. Am I right?
Yeah, I
they're
think
both-
that's what we were referring to as the opt-in
Yeah.
code, but I think it's the
Yeah, they're
specialized code
both
might be the
opt-in. There's
official
actually
name.
three. There's a base code that you get
Right.
if you don't opt into anything. You can opt into
Right.
the stretch code, and you can also opt into the specialized code.
Right. Okay,
yeah, but what you're saying is we basically adopted the stretch code as.
We
our
already
code.
did, yeah. We already
Right.
opted into that
So
one.
we
Right.
checked that
So the
off.
discussion is whether you go to the next one up.
That's
right,
Right.
question,
the
yeah.
specialized opt-in
Yeah.
stretch code or whatever, so we
Yeah.
can all be in the same page, yeah.
And the one thing I was going to say, Oscar, because you'd asked about resources and presentations that are available around some of this. There are a lot of resources that have been put together on different policy examples related to embodied carbon as well. There's a very active group in the BSA, the Carbon Leadership Forum Policy Group, and they have done presentations both to Boston, Cambridge, and a few other communities where they've compiled both the local ones, but also some of the national examples that I'm sure they would be happy if you wanted to have kind of a discussion specifically around that topic, they could come and kind of share some
Um,
of that.
And I can reach out to them,
I'm happy to as well.
yeah, okay. This is really helpful. Anything else that anyone, I have to unfortunately run off at 2, and I'm sure all of you do too. Anything else that you can think of that we're missing here? I think we're gonna see some overlap with some of the other, from the other 5 groups. But I just felt like, we put this together, we were just vetting all this, and I thought you two would be great to come in and just kind of review it and see what you thought. I mean, does this seem like it's a good path for conversation, and then or are we missing something?
The only other thing I've heard about is Boston's proposed zero net carbon zoning talks about construction site emissions reduction strategies, but I think that's pretty extreme on the kind of bleeding edge of new ideas, and might be worth seeing how that shakes out with Boston before you try to tackle something like that.
Okay.
I had one question if I could. Natasha,
Yes.
can any of our guests identify what towns are kind of leading the way other than Boston and Cambridge in these areas? Is Concord, for example, one of those? I'm just curious if they're aware of what towns are kind of leading the way here.
Yeah, I can share screen if you enable that. I can
Yes.
show you a few relevant examples.
Let me see. I'm in charge of screen sharing here. Multiple. Okay. Let me know if that works. What's the group of the towns that are sharing information? This is what,
So these are the towns that I'm aware of as of a month or 2 ago. I guess a month ago, that are considering adopting the specialized opt-in stretch code. In addition, 10 towns and cities have signed up to do the gas ban, which has now been written as basically a specialized opt-in stretch code, in the way that it's going to build off of the stretch code as a regulatory tool. And so though that I'd have to check on what, but a lot of that list overlaps with this list.
So those are 10 towns that are reviewing opting out of gas. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so
So
these
they-
ones are opting
so
into
they
the
ban-
specialized, and then on top
Right.
of that, 10 towns and cities are going to opt into a hyper specialized, which bans gas, except for
Right.
labs and healthcare.
And of this list of towns, there are towns that say they're going to do things, but then act very slowly. And then there are others that are kind of the leaders in the pack. I would
Right.
guess that somebody like Lexington or, I don't know, but well, Carlisle probably,
Or Newton? Yeah.
maybe Newton.
Yeah, Newton's already
Wellesley.
submitted their warrant article for their town meeting to do this,
Okay.
the specialized opt-in.
Do you have individuals that can be contacted in each of these towns? Or is that something that we'd have to do?
I can put you in touch with somebody that probably knows those folks. There's also going to be an event, a web-based event coming up. Let me see if I can find it, where towns and cities that are preparing to do the hyper specialized, the gas ban version, are going to talk about their plans and strategy to get that approved and moved forward. So that's not quite applicable to you because you're not signed up yet and the 10 list has been set,
Right,
but that would at least help you find those folks that are, addressing these issues like opting into the stretch code in those different
Right.
towns. So that might be a good event for one of you to attend, just to connect with people there. I can I'll post the link here in a minute.
Yeah, great.
thank you so much for that. That's helpful. We always like to try not to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. And it's also, I was on the Green Communities group for a year and then it didn't pass through town meeting because I think we're a little careful about being the first initiating anything, but once we have towns that we see how it's working for them, or towns that we feel like are peer towns that have similar structures, it seems like we feel more comfortable with that. So if that's already happening, that's really helpful for us to be able to explain to the town of how it's being implemented already. Okay. I think this is great. Thank you so much. I know I'm mindful of the time. It's 1:59. I think we have enough information, Stephen, to bring to you. We're gonna put this together and to have a really good conversation. And George, I'll send you that slide. I'll send that to everyone included with these meeting notes. But it's been really great. Thank you so much, Andrea and Jacob, for joining us as our special guests for the specialized stretch code. And
Happy to.
Yeah.
I feel like if we can start talking to other towns, and if we start becoming leaders in this, it'll be great to share with others as well, so we'll pay it forward. So thanks again to everyone, and we'll keep everyone in touch, and we'll share all of this at the next meeting.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's great. Good luck. And Natasha, I just emailed you that email that went out about the hyper specialized gas ban code.
Perfect. And I'll share that with everyone. And if anyone has any other questions, let's just do it through email.
Jacob, I'm just curious, is the gas ban is across the town, so it's townwide, so that means even individual homes that are being built are under the same ban as the commercial buildings and municipal buildings when the gas ban goes into effect in the town?
Correct.
a-
All of these stretch code based tools.
Yep.
You must adopt both residential and commercial simultaneously. If you do the specialized opt-in or the gas ban version, they go together
Got it.
with that commercial and residential.
And this is next Friday, the 13th, right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So I'll put that in here.
But Lisa is an awesome resource. She is very well connected on this stretch code adoption front.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
And have a good
Thanks.
weekend.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.